So I want to give you an image. Here it is. There's an office party. So there's a concern, let's say they sell vacation packages. And a man has been working for them for 50 years. He's retiring at the age of 70. He's been working with the same firm for 50 years. And they're making him a gala farewell because he's retiring. And yes, they're in a nice room, and there's food. And finally, the president of the company gives him a gold watch. Okay, could this happen? Now, could you picture a man stepping back from himself at that moment and say, this is what I get for 50 years of my life? A gold watch? What was I thinking? Could you picture someone thinking like that? So the box that you would put that in is that people are motivated to do what they do and make huge life decisions without thinking about why, about where is it taking them, what's it going to get them. People end up living lives that they never dreamed that they would end up living, and in the negative and in the positive. So I'm going to give you two examples, a negative one and a positive one. Which one do you want first, the negative or the positive? Negative. How many of you are from New York or the East Coast? I have my theories about East Coast people always choose negative. People from other places may or may not, but East Coast, 100 times out of 100, start negative, okay? Okay, so so I'm not going to choose like one of these, extreme characters like Hitler, but I'll choose somebody whose life was less awful, but certainly not what the great plan was. Around 5 years ago, maybe a little bit less, there was a girl from one of the schools here on the campus, if I'm not mistaken, who went back to the States and she got an office job. And her job was to work for a caterer and to keep their books. Okay, so she noticed that meat deliveries were made, but there was no cash expenditure some of the time. The meat producer was being paid off the books. Now, is that unusual in America? No. So she didn't pay that much attention. But she also noticed that the customers were told that the meat came from specific companies, that there were checks for, so there obviously is a different source of other meat that there isn't checks for. So the customers are being told that all of the meat at their, let's say, wedding is coming from Kosher King, and there are receipts for Kosher King, but nowhere near enough compared to the amount of meat served at the wedding. So she began to wonder, where's this meat coming from, and why is there no record of it? So she asked the boss, and she got an evasive answer. Like, oh, we didn't get around to it, or like, we don't always keep the receipts, So that was okay for a while, but then she realized that if he's trying to hide something, he's not going to say what he's doing. So she went to the rabbi of the community. The rabbi figured it out in 2 seconds. It took him no time to figure it out. What was happening? You tell me.
They're saying it was kosher meat, but they're also getting it from a non-kosher.
Yeah, they were bringing in non-kosher meat, which is much, much cheaper, selling it as kosher, and not do. Okay. The rabbi sent people to do 24-hour surveillance at the caterer plant, and of course they discovered eventually the truck coming with the treif meat. Okay, clear? So what happens next? So it becomes public knowledge, okay? This means that a lot of people's dishes were treif. A lot of people's dishwashers were treif, okay? A lot of people made weddings where they invited religious people and served them treif, which is a terrible humiliation. Okay, clear? And the man, of course, ends up in court. Do you think he got away with it?
No. Yes. Yeah. Maybe it's secular.
Secular court. He got away. He didn't get away. He had to do public service. He had to pay a huge fine. They closed down his business. But did he sit in prison? No. Okay, clear? You have the picture? Go back to him when he was 20. He just finished yeshiva. He's going to get married soon. He's thinking, what business could I go into? And he thinks catering. I was always good at food. Is this what he saw himself doing?
No.
How did he end up there? What do you think the steps were?
He probably at first sold kosher food, like it was doing the right way, the proper way.
Okay, first was doing it right. Could you see where that's the first step?
Yeah.
Okay. Then what?
Then
Where would the pressure come from?
Either like it's either himself, like he feels like stressed or there's like monetary issues or whatever, or maybe like he's having a lot of kids, he doesn't have enough money to support them. Or
Financial stuff. Okay, next is financial stuff. So in this particular case, the way I heard it was that he borrowed money to cover debts from the gray market. And do you know what the gray market is? Did you ever see this in law? You see this in newspapers sometimes, in the classifieds. Do you need $50,000 fast? No guarantors, no credit rating. You've seen those ads?
Yeah.
Never borrow money from these folks. So you call up, they will lend you $50,000 within the week. Okay, what do you have to do?
huge interest.
Huge interest. They don't even tell you how much interest. They say, okay, here's your $50,000. You just have to pay us $500 a month. Anybody could do that. For how long? Rest of your life. Okay, clear? Okay, so they choose like incredible interest rates. Let's say you stop paying. Then what happens? They make it not worth it your while. Okay, got it? So they say things, accidents sometimes happen to people, Like, remember there was like a big fire in the store on, 18th and 5th? These kind of things happen. And even like in traffic, all kinds of things happen. You have to watch out. Like your kids go on the school bus every day at 25 to 9, right? It leaves your house at 25 to 9. It goes down Maple Street. After Maple, it turns on Oak till the school. All kinds of things happen. Got this?
Yeah.
That's how they talk.
Yeah.
They either are the mafia or they're mafia wannabes. But that's how they work. So he was afraid. What should he have done at that point?
Call the cops.
Okay,
To pay back the money.
he should have borrowed money from anybody to pay it back. Okay, clear, sold his house, done anything. But he didn't. So once he was entrapped, he had to pay them back somehow, and that's how he got into the treif meat business. So the reason I'm telling you this terribly sad story is that he had choices all along the way, until he reached a point where he really thought he had no choices. Okay, this is clear? So that's the sad story. Now I'll tell you a good story. Okay? Did any of you ever hear of Rav Yitzchak David Grossman? Such a hero of mine. Okay. So I want to tell you how I got to know this person, who's very famous in Israel. He won the Israel Prize, which is the highest civilian award. So my family and I were living in a moshav in the north. This moshav was so small and so distant that like nobody ever heard of it. It's like really out in the boonies. Okay, yeah. Okay, so in those years, in small places like this, people didn't have private phones. There was like a phone that was in the secretary of the moshav's office, and if you got a call, he would call you on the loudspeaker to come and receive your call. Okay, you could make calls from there also. But so I got a call. So this is exciting. Like, wow. All of my friends know I don't have a phone. Who's calling? Okay. So I go there. It was somebody whose name I never found out, but someone from South Africa. How they found out that I was living on this moshav, I also never found out. But they told me this tragic story. Their daughter came to study at Hebrew University, and she's not, apparently from how they described her, not that attractive, whatever, not so much self-esteem. So she was sitting in a class next to a boy who identified himself as Avi. So she assumed his name is what? Avram, yeah? But it wasn't, it was Abu. He was Arab, but charming, good-looking, whatever. So in Arab culture, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory sense, it's very important when a man is courting a woman to be very good to her. Like he has to show how generous he is, what a man he is. So this was her dream. Like she never had dates at all, hardly, but having a guy who like buys her nice presents and jewelry and takes her out to good restaurants, this is like amazing. Now he wasn't trying to trap her. This is normal in his culture. Okay, clear? So she married him against her parents' wishes, okay? So the next thing that happens, again in the culture, is once a woman is married, so the most important virtue would be what? In Western marriage, what's the most important thing? If a man is saying, well, I married the best woman in the world, what would he mean? In our culture, what's like the best wife?
She works, she's a great cook, she's there.
She's there for me,
Yeah.
right? In Arab culture, the best wife is the one who's completely submissive. It's a different culture. So having a job, being a great cook, being a great companion, none of those are important compared to being absolutely obedient. So she ran into a cultural problem where he would say things which from his perspective were not demanding or controlling. Like, I'll be home at 5, and that means you have to be at there with my food on the table, waiting for me at 5, no matter what else you had in mind. That means if you're on the telephone when I come in the door and you knew I was coming at 5, what happened? It's not good enough to say, oh, sorry, I'll call back. Why were you on the phone at 5? Okay, I lived next to Arabs here in Yerushalayim. Nice people, but when the husband came home in the evening, the kids who were like, then the kids must have been like 11, 12, they greeted him in their garden every day with a pitcher of lemonade and a cup, ready for him to take a drink before he even gets into the house. It's a different culture. So she couldn't live with that culture. In Western culture, if you feel a man is controlling or abusive, what do? Your husband tells you, I want you home by 5. What would you say?
No.
I want you home every day at 5. You'd say, forget it, like I'm not a clock. So the more he would demand obedience, the less she would give it, and the angrier he would get. So whether or not he started out as being somebody violent and abusive, he ended up being somebody violent and abusive. Okay, clear? So she's now being beaten on a regular basis. He has his family involved because, again, in that culture, when you marry someone, you marry their whole family. Okay, she can't leave the house without somebody from his family telling him about it later. And that would lead to, where did you go? And why were you there? Yeah, her life was unbearable. So she called her family in South Africa, and she said, I have to get out of here, but I can't even leave the village. I don't have a car. They watch me 24/7. I can't go to the bus stop without having him there. I got to get out of here. I'm going to commit suicide if I don't go. Okay. So what do they want from me? They called me. The moshav I lived in overlooked the village. They wanted me to go into the village and take her out. How long do you think it took me to say no on the phone?
1 second.
1 second. They said, I can't go into an Arab village and say Eifo Racheli. I mean, I can't do this. I want to live. Like, this isn't going to happen. So here's the chapters of the story happen. I don't know. Here's the part I don't know. Here's the part I do know. She got out. How did she get out? A young rabbi who was all of 23 at the time, straight out of Meishurim, he was on his first job in the north, bought a wig, okay, a long wig, puts the wig on his head. He bought torn jeans and a sweatshirt and sandals. He enters the village. He asks somebody, where's like the head man? You know, like the one who's in charge. So again, in Arab culture, they have someone in charge who's called the mukhtar. The mukhtar means the one who wears the crown, okay? The race is the head. They even call the prime minister, whatever. So they bring him to the most important man in the village. He says, brother, it's all about love. We can have peace. It's all about love. So this man looks at him. What does he think? This is a hippie. He's bombed out of his mind on who knows what. Does he see him as a threat? No. So he says, okay, brother, is there anything else you wanted to tell me? And he gives him a flower and says, no. Okay. So he's in the village a few days, yeah? And he sits in people's homes and he talks to them about love and peace. What is he really doing? He's finding where she lives and what her husband's schedule is. Okay, clear? It took him only a few days. I think he was there 4 or 5 days. He had it down. He leaves work at a certain time. Okay? If he comes back at a certain time, his family comes over, but they come in and out. It's unpredictable. Okay. His car was parked out of the village. He went to his car on the day he decided. As soon as he was sure that the husband was good and gone, he went to the right house, parked, pushed the door open, grabbed her by her arm, threw her in the car, no talk, and zoomed out of the village like a bat out of hell. Okay, clear? Okay, is that courageous?
Yeah.
That is courageous. And I'm going to talk to you about who this man is and how he got there. Okay, so this man grew up in Neve Yerushalayim, no less. His father was the Rosh Yeshiva of Pinsk, Karlin Yeshiva. But he grew up in a household where other people were extremely important. So he would wake up in the morning when he was a child, and there'd be like another child in bed with him. Some child who was found begging in the street or who came on Aliyah and his parents had no place to put him. That's how he grew up. So in his culture, in Neve Yerushalayim culture, how old will he be when it's time for him to think about marriage? What age are we talking about? 18, okay, or a little before even. So his parents select some girl, okay, does he know anything about her really? Nope, it's all in their hands, and he trusts them. He's sitting across the table from her in her living room, okay, both sets of parents are in the kitchen, and they tell, you don't have to feel pressured if you want to talk even an hour, we're here, don't worry, talk to each other as long as you want, and if you want to see each other another time, it's okay, got this, but don't feel pressured, this is how it is. So they're talking together, and she says to him, where do you want to live? And he said, I don't know. So she said, well, what do you mean? Now, where did she expect he would say he wants to live?
Here in my parents' house.
Here in Neve Yerushalayim, or maybe Bnei Brak, or maybe Bet Shemesh. And I think that finished all the possibilities. So she says, what do you mean you don't know? And I want you to hear what he said. Because this is the kind of thing that leads to having a different kind of thing on your gravestone. He says, we have so much. We have parents who've been there for us emotionally. We have Torah education. We have a way of life that we love. There are people who don't have any of that. They don't have anybody behind them. They have no direction in life. They don't know what they want of themselves, and they're drifting. It's not fair that some people should have everything and some people should have nothing. So she said, what are you saying? So he says, I want to live where people have nothing. So she said, no. And that was the end of that shidduch. So his wife, who he's married to, was the next girl who he met. This girl was out of the picture. So he went to his Rebbe, and he told him his dream. And he said, where do you think we should live? So he said, come back to me tomorrow, I'll research. So he researched, he came back, and he said, you want to move to Migdal HaEmek. Did any of you ever hear of Migdal HaEmek?
No.
There are reasons for this. So this is the worst place in Israel to live. It has the highest suicide rate, the lowest employment rate, and the highest percentage of men in prison. So he says, that's where I want to live, okay? Now he had been married at this point for 2 years because he was very young. He was 18 or so when he got married. So the two sets of parents supported them for a while. Well, he studied, made adjustments to married life, but now it's time to move on. So he told his wife, who had agreed to this, remember, I want to go to Migdal HaEmek. So he made a 2-week trip there without her just to get a picture of what life is like there. So the graffiti is no longer there, but when he went up there, the graffiti in the entrance to Migdal HaEmek said, welcome to hell. Okay, clear? So there he is, like Hasidic clothes, the beard, the whole works. He's a good schmoozer. He's good at talking to people. So he asked people like, wow, how long have you been living here in Migdal HaEmek? They're talking to him. They said, why are you asking? He says, well, I'm thinking of moving. I said, moving here? There really aren't. There's like not that much to move here for, he went into a store, and as soon as he went in, somebody asked him who died. So he said, well, why do you think someone died? He said, well, the only reason a religious-looking person like you would come would be to bury somebody. So he's musical. He plays guitar and he sings. So he went into, after everything closed, he went to the bars and pubs. He was singing, old-fashioned Jewish songs that everybody knows, David Melech Yisrael, whatever. People are opening themselves. So when the last bar closed, he went to the police station. And he said to the sergeant behind the desk, could you please arrest me? And the sergeant said, what did you do? He said, I didn't do anything wrong, but there's no place to sleep. There's no hotels or hostels here, and I need, it's late. I need to go to bed. So he said, this isn't a hotel. It's a jail. It's a lockup. I can't just give you a bed. And he said, well, what do you suggest I do? So the man was like this, middle-aged Sephardi Baba. So he says, come to my house. So he let him sleep on their carpet. He didn't have an extra bed for him. And by the end of 2 weeks of doing this, he had a thick notebook with what's wrong with Migdal HaEmek, what has to happen before it could be fixed. Okay, so he and his wife move up there on borrowed money. And the first thing he did, he realized, after interviewing so many people, what's really wrong is that the men can't support their families. So they end up in jail because they all get into crime. So the first thing that has to be done is to get the men out of jail. So he made up a job. This wasn't a job anyone hired him to do, as a prison counselor. He would visit them, give them vocational information, and he taught them Pirkei Avos so they would believe in themselves. And eventually the jail hired him because the system he created, which is this combination of religion focused on belief in your own purposefulness and vocational training, is now the system used in all prisons in Israel and many prisons outside of Israel. It has to be voluntary, meaning the men who will join the program have to want it. So of the men who join, 80% of them don't go back to jail. This is huge. Okay, so then his next thing is the kids. So he started Shabbos clubs for the kids. Next was counseling people in their difficult marriages. When he was 23, he was elected by the people of Migdal HaEmek to be their official rabbi. This is the only salary he takes. Okay, and now let's flash forward. So besides doing all of this, he also realized that you have to start with kids who come from dysfunctional families when they're young. He started a school campus that's bigger than Neve's campus, considerably bigger, 6,000 kids. Your ticket into his campus is coming from a difficult situation. Okay, so they have not a million, but they have many different programs. Programs for girls, programs for boys, for Russians, for Ethiopians, high-level learning, low-level learning, every possible kind of program. Okay. So the reason I'm telling you his story, he's still alive, is that he was focused. This is not a person who would end up with a gold watch at the end of 50 years. He knew what he wants to be, and he lived his life in a way in which every big step was a step towards his goal. So the reason I'm telling you this story is because if you want to end up where you want to be, you have to be able to break it down to small goals and to stay motivated. So there are two kinds of motivations, external ones and internal ones. The way contemporary society gets people to do what they do is through external motivation. Are any of you into law? If you're studying law? Okay. How long does it take to make partner in a good firm? How many years? 8 years. Okay, so I have a friend who's a talented lawyer. So she joined a very well-known New York firm, Struck Lavan, and she knew it's like an 8-year wait till partner. But how many hours do people work in really good firms? How many hours a week? 80 and down, but down is only down to 65. Okay, good week 65, really bad week 80. So how do you get a person to work 65 hours a week? So the way you do it is by, here are the two carrots. Okay, one is money, but the other is prestige. So just working for Strzok is enough to get somebody in the door. But when you're a second year lawyer, you get a somewhat bigger office. And the third year, you get your own secretary. And the fourth year, you get a bigger office still. And the fifth year, you're already in the same part of the building as the partners. And the sixth year, you get a key to the company elevator and a window. And okay, got this? So I knew her last when she was a sixth year associate. So she was far too busy to visit me when I was in the States. Although I have to say, to her benefit, she did once come to me for Shabbos. How does a lawyer like her come for Shabbos? So she comes the very last minute, comes with all of her stuff, okay? And when we're not eating, where is she? In her room. And I'm not asking her any questions, but I know what's going on there, yeah? Okay, she's working. Okay, so I went to see her. So I opened, the door, and there she is on the floor. So I thought like she fainted or fell or something. And I said, what happened? And so she was embarrassed. She had pulled up part of the rug because she thought that the male associates had somewhat bigger offices, and she was counting the floor tiles. That's how you get someone to work 70 hours a week. So what they're holding up is prestige and money. Okay, clear? Does that necessarily fit with a person's genuine life goals for themselves? No. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So external motivations are things that you should be suspicious of. Ask if I want it, is it still getting me where I want to be at the end or not? If it's not getting you where you want to be at the end, it's not worth it. Why not? Money is good. I'm pro-money. What are some good things about money? What does it buy you besides necessities? Comfort. What else? Freedom. Buys you comfort, it buys you freedom, it buys you status. Okay? But in the end, it doesn't buy you yourself. Being the self who you want to be can't be purchased with money. So go back to our initial image of the man at the dinner receiving the gold watch. He lost himself somewhere along the line. Could you see where this is so? So how does internal motivation work? In order to keep himself sane and to be himself, he decided to, no matter what's going on in his life, and you can imagine he was in the camps, he would study people. So that would give him some sort of perspective. So one of his studies is who's most likely to commit suicide and who's least likely to commit suicide. Suicide in the death camps was very easy. You just had to approach the fences and touch them. They were all electrified. Okay, so who do you think his archetype of the most likely person to commit suicide would be?
Person with nothing to live for.
Well, in those circumstances, remember, we know that the war ended, and they didn't know it would ever end. Remember that. It's not so simple to talk about that. The archetype we presented in his book as his subject under study was the conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. So as soon as he was forced into Auschwitz and shaven and numbered, he's no longer the conductor of the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra. There is no orchestra. Nobody knows him. He's like anybody else. He had no self, so he committed suicide. So what that tells you is that his self and his career were so entwined that without his career he had no self. So his archetype of a person least likely to commit suicide was similar but not identical to what you said. Mothers didn't commit suicide by and large, even if their children had all been killed, which I found a very interesting thing. Even if they saw their children killed, they weren't living for their children at that point. The act of mothering gave people an identity as a nurturer and made them believe in life and relationship. And that was enough to hold people more. So the reason I'm telling you all of this is that you're at a place in life we have to decide who you want to be and try to stay internally motivated. Don't depend on external motivations. This makes sense to you? Okay, so Rambam says the greatest motivation of all is doing something because it's true, because it's the right thing. Okay, but, and this is a critical but, you also need external motivations, at least at the beginning. So you have to learn how to motivate yourself externally and internally. Can't resist telling you a true story. There was a teacher at Neve who no longer teaches at Neve. He teaches now in Or Sameach, called Rabbi David Gottlieb. Did any of you ever hear him? He's a very powerful teacher, but in any case, so he's brilliant. So he was, when we moved back to Yerushalayim from the Moshav, he was my upstairs neighbor and with his family. So his kids are all bright, bright, bright. Okay, so his 2-year-old will sometimes be brought to me to babysit. So here she is, she's 2, like 2. So she's like this high, and she's emotionally 2-year-old, but she's like at least like a 6, 7-year-old in her head, yeah? She talks fluently, the whole works. So one day she was like down in my house, they went someplace, and I was playing with her. And I said to her, Chaya Bela, you're such a smart little girl. Look what a nice Lego tower you made. Why are you still in diapers? I thought I was doing the family, you're 2 years old already. You could have panties, that's much better. So she looked at me, there was a certain look of disdain that she sometimes gave me, and I knew this was going to be good. She gives me the look, she says, don't you know? So I said, no what? And she says, there are 3 reasons. Now, as soon as she said there are 3 reasons, I lost, why did I open my mouth? Okay, there are 3 reasons. Okay, so I said, what are they? One is when you make in your diaper, you could be with everybody. If you make in the toilet, you're all by yourself. And you aren't with everybody. And you don't have your toys. And okay, is that true? It's true? Okay, who am I to argue? Okay, the next was when you make in your diaper, it's warm. Don't think too much about this. Okay. But when you make in the toilet, it's cold. Okay. Well taken. And the final thing she said, and when you finish in the toilet, they pull the flushing thing and it makes a big loud noise. And I don't like the noise. Does it make a noise? I said, okay, Chaya Bela, far be it from me to tell you what to do. Let's go back to Lego. Okay, so a couple of months later, she was back in my house again. And when she came in, she picks up her dress, she shows me her panties. So I said, wow, you're wearing panties, no diapers. Now, I knew this was the wrong thing to do. This wasn't done innocently. I knew this is bad educationally. Don't do this, but I had no self-control. So I said, didn't you tell me there are 3 good reasons not for So she, remember we spoke about this. So again, I get the look. And she says, don't you know? So I said, no what? They give you chocolate. So that's called the value of external motivation. Okay, clear. So what I want to tell you, though, is that she was still limited. She's 2, right? So she doesn't see any value in being clean. She just sees value in getting chocolate. So in a certain sense, she's living a life that's not so honest, although it's to her benefit. So the final thing I want to get to you today is to live well, you have to be able to give yourself external motivators that have something to do with who you are and what you really want. V'zehu for now. Okay, and next class is on a whole new topic.